What's on your radar, Ryan?
So the specter of Larry Summers continues to haunt the White House. The Washington Post is reporting that late last month, Biden had a private phone call with Summers to hear him out directly on his criticism of his economic policy. Now, if Biden is in fact listening to Summers and economists like him, all he has to do is ask Barack Obama how that worked out for him, or ask the millions who lost homes to the foreclosure crisis, or the millions whose lives and careers were derailed by a recovery that was way too slow and that saw nearly all the gains flow to the very top. Larry Summers, for those who don't remember, was Obama's top economist at the height of the financial crisis. He also spent time as president of Harvard before being fired for being a sexist dunce. The good news is that it doesn't seem like either Biden or his economic team is actually listening to Summers. More on that in a moment. First, let's talk about what Summers' beef with Biden's economic policy actually is. It boils down to inflation. Summers is making the centerpiece of his complaint that Biden is doing too much to boost the economy and that all of the government spending will drive up inflation. He calls inflation, quote, the primary risk we face. Now look, real inflation that gets too high can really be a problem for regular people, if, that is, wages don't keep up with it. But when people like Summers talk about inflation and an overheating economy, they're actually talking about something much darker than the price of groceries outpacing our paycheck. What this is really about is a power struggle between bosses and workers. In the 1970s, according to mainstream economists, workers got too much power. Their unions were driving up wages not just for them, but at non-unionized companies too. And workers were demanding dignity on the job. As one worker put it, quote, if you were 22 and had a job where you were treated like a machine and knew you had about 30 years to go, how would you feel? Bosses had no idea how to even think about that sort of demand. But bosses did know how to make workers' demands go away: fire them. And so Jimmy Carter brought in Paul Volcker to chair the Federal Reserve and do just that. He jacked up interest rates to the sky, bringing about a vicious recession. By the early 80s, inflation was coming down. Since so many people had been fired, they had less money to spend, and now there were lots of people applying for every one job opening. That meant wages went down, and it became much harder to form a union. Unions that hung on accepted lower wages, just not to be destroyed. Reagan fired the air traffic controllers when they went on strike, and it was a signal to big business that they could do whatever they wanted to unions and the government wouldn't stop them and might even help them. This new era saw all of the gains in the power flowing to the top. Inequality skyrocketed. And the way this whole arrangement was policed was by making sure pressure on wages stayed low. Anytime real wages showed even a hint that they were thinking about going up, the Fed would jack up interest rates and slow the economy. It got so bad that the market started getting spooked if there was even a hint of a good jobs report. If it looked like workers were doing a tiny bit better, investors thought, well, now the Fed's going to raise interest rates, so we better sell everything now and slow down hiring. The Fed chairman didn't have to hit the dog anymore. He just had to roll up the newspaper and the boy would go running out of the room, tail between his legs. That's why the words of a Fed chairman and of a president actually matter. In most cases, when politicians talk, it's just talk. But if they're talking about wages and inflation, what they say filters immediately into the real world and into people's paychecks, or out of it. The fight over wages and inflation is at the very heart of the class war. And what's interesting is that even those who think race and gender equity dynamics should be prioritized ahead of a class analysis, wages and inflation are still the most important game in town. Think about it this way. If there are 10 unemployed workers for every job opening, bosses can pay the bare minimum and treat workers like garbage. In a country imbued with racism and sexism, that means rampant racism and sexism in hiring and on the job. But if there's one worker for every job opening, companies have to raise wages, but they also have to treat people with dignity. If a boss messes with the schedule or harasses you or treats you as less than because of your identity, you can just quit and go find another good job. That's real power. And you can't do that if it's harder to find another job, and your boss knows that. The name for that situation is full employment, and it's the biggest fear of the ruling class. When an economist or on CNBC or Fox Business warns about inflation, what he's really worried about is workers getting too much power. Now, back to Biden and Summers. Let's pretend for a moment that Summers' beef with Biden is sincere and grounded in economic data, and that it's not just bitterness that he's no longer an insider. The fact that Biden made the call to Summers at all is worrying, but the White House response to it is encouraging. Here's how the Post relayed the official line from the White House. A White House official said Biden seeks, quote, a wide spectrum of views, unquote, and the call was, quote, brief and informal. The official said it took place before the president gave a speech in Cleveland on Friday in which he laid out his economic vision. Quote, the president has a large network and has spoken to a number of voices with economic expertise outside of the administration, including many with whom he has disagreements, the official said. So as somebody who's covered the White House over the years, let me parse that for you. When a mainstream news outlet refers to a, quote, White House official like that, and the quote is totally robotic, it means it came from a spokesperson, which means it was approved up high and represents the White House's public position. And Larry Summers knows that, which must have made the brief and informal part sting when he read it in the paper. Then the spokesperson added that Biden often speaks to Bernie, which is an extra little twist of the knife. But the most important detail there was that Biden's brief call with Summers happened right before Biden went on stage to give a major address on the economy. Let's take a listen to the speech he gave right after talking to Summers.
I'm a capitalist. But here's the deal. From 1948 after the war to 1977, I think it was 1977, 79, productivity in America grew by 100%. We made more things. Productivity grew. You know what the workers' pay grew? By 100%. Since 1979, all that changed. Productivity has grown 4 times faster than pay has grown. The basic bargain in this country's been broken.
All right, he struggled to get that out, but you know what? It's fine. That's a fairly standard progressive understanding of the 20th century. Thanks to the New Deal and the rise of organized labor, workers were able to share in the country's prosperity. Since the late 70s, when neoliberalism set in, elites have been strip mining the assets of the country with all of the wealth flowing upwards. So far, so good. Here's where he takes it next.
Let me tell you something. My sole measure of economic success is how working families are doing, whether they have jobs that deliver dignity. That means we have to focus on wages like we used to.
Okay, great. Working families, jobs that deliver dignity, all fine stuff. But we're still in the realm of standard Democratic campaign talking points. What else you got, Joe?
When it comes to the economy we're building, rising wages aren't a bug, they're a feature.
Wait, what? Roll that clip again, the same clip, that one where Biden said that thing about wages.
When it comes to the economy we're building, rising wages aren't a bug, they're a feature.
Wait, a Democrat talking about focusing on raising wages? And not just any Democrat. Biden is a charter member of the neoliberal deficit hawk club who spent his career in the Senate trying to cut federal spending. We must have heard that wrong. Let's roll it one more time.
When it comes to the economy we're building, rising wages aren't a bug, they're a feature.
So to repeat what he said, when it comes to rising wages, they aren't a bug, they're a feature. That is exactly right. Too many conventional economists think that rising wages are a bug, something bad the government needs to do something about. Rising wages are a feature, not a bug. They're what we want. This right here is the speech he gave just moments after that call with Larry Summers. If this is what comes out after a call with Summers, I say take more of them. Let's go back to Biden one more time. Why does he argue that rising wages are a feature and not a bug? Here's Biden.
We want to get something economists call full employment. Instead of workers competing with each other for jobs that are scarce, we want employers to compete with each other to attract work. We want the companies to compete to attract workers.
Again, he's exactly right. And that's also the perfect intersection for Democrats of the class war and the increasingly toxic debates about wokeness. The way to actually help marginalized communities is to make them not marginalized, to give them power. Power they can use however they see fit in pursuit of their own dignity and their own vision for a good life. Full employment gives them that power. You think that factory owners in World War II hired Rosie the Riveter because he got woke on gender equity? You think factory owners during the war began hiring black workers because they became sudden converts to civil rights? No, it was because they had no choice. Black workers have historically been the last hired and the first fired, which means that the closer the economy is to full employment, the better those workers do, as this data from the Economic Policy Institute shows. Now, economic power alone is no guarantee of civil rights or human rights, but it creates a political base of power you can use to fight for those rights. The greatest advance for civil rights in the 60s came after 2 decades of rising wages. That's not a coincidence. The white backlash made its most serious inroads in the 80s and 90s, when wages were flat and declining for communities that were becoming ever more marginalized. That's not a coincidence either. None of this means we shouldn't worry about price increases, but wages don't have to be the thing to go after. Medicare for All would bring down prices in the healthcare industry pretty significantly, and that's a key driver of inflation. Breaking up monopolies would bring down prices too, but that's for another radar. For now, we could just say that the easiest reason to ignore Larry Summers is actually this one. He was good buddies with Jeffrey Epstein. Go away, Larry. All right, Emily. So if the last photo didn't convince you, that's Larry Summers, Bill Gates, and Jeffrey Epstein hanging out together.
The three amigos.
Epstein was a big donor to Harvard, and so he's known Larry Summers for a long time when Summers was president. Taking a rich person's money for your institution is one thing. When you decide to become friends with that person, and you continue being friends with that person after they've been convicted of this, that, or the other thing, that doesn't speak so well to your judgment, I would say. But back to his economic judgment, what do you think the role of Summers and this White House actually is?
Yeah, I think it's a great microcosm of this broader struggle between the sort of like new left that Biden has staffed his administration with, and then sort of those holdouts from either the Obama era or beyond in the Democratic establishment. Larry Summers is a good example. I'm sure there are people on Biden's staff right now that have Larry Summers' ear, or vice versa, pretty frequently. And so I think the way that this all played out, where he's saying he's talking to Bernie, the White House puts out, as you said, pretty clearly a spokesman crafted an approved statement about how it was just one call, et cetera, et cetera. He listens to many people. I think it's a microcosm of a much broader battle, and I think your radar was right on. I mean, I think as we've seen a lot of things shift since about 1960, there's been this rise in our ethos of being just all about money. And when everything is about money, I think that's how you see this divorce between the stock market and wages and individual net worth. And that is such an essential element of all of this. I mean, the stock market has become so wildly untethered from the real economy, it's baffling. Like over the last year especially, it's been a really stark reminder of how different one economy is than the other.
Right. And I do think most of this is just personal. Summers saw an uptick. We saw an uptick in wages and inflation right after the first stimulus was passed. It will fade just like the last one faded. But I'm looking forward to seeing what's on your radar next.